Hello, let's start this up. All right, so we can get some words on the bottom. So the point of this entire lecture, this little section, is to talk about the mind while kind of messing with your mind. So I've picked out a lot of things that kind of illustrate how the mind works and that I just find fascinating, really, really fascinating. Um, so shown here are human brains. And these are from a type of a technique called fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. Functional magnetic resonance imaging is measuring the flow of blood in the brain. It's basically looking for water, and it's looking for areas where the amount of water goes up or the amount of water goes down in the brain. And so if it goes up, you're going to have nice little sort of red areas, and if it goes down, I think you're going to have blue areas. So that's going to be a good indicator of blood flow. And so even at the level, so this is not the level of actual neurons firing. They don't actually have a very good way to image that from outside the brain. This is just like particular regions where there are neurons being turned on. And even at this extremely crude sort of scale, you can still see some interesting things. So shown here are images of people's brains. These people are alive and awake. And this is when they're shown a picture of a face. And this is the particular face. And then over here is a picture of the brain. And here they're shown a picture of a house. And if you look, so on different times when they're shown the house, the pattern is almost exactly the same. So compare the bottom one to the top one. They did this 10 times with 10 faces and 10 houses. Every time there's a face there, the even times like 0, 2, 4, 6. This is the average, everything. The odd runs, 1, 3, 5, 7. This is the average. That correlation, the R value, is a regular Pearson correlation coefficient. And that is a very high correlation coefficient. That says we've got a pretty good handle on, how the part of the brain actually controls thought, or rather responds to stimulus. And so I think, as you would have seen in one of the videos now, so if you haven't watched all the videos, go back and watch some of those videos. Particularly the first two, you had people imaging thought directly from a human brain and then even from a cat's brain. And this is the sort of technique. This is what the raw data would look like for that. You look for areas of the brain that light up and areas of the brain that light up differently when we're looking at different things. See, there's some areas that light up similarly, but over here we've got a correlation coefficient that is negative, which means that they're actually quite different. There's not even randomly different. It's almost like they're opposite, that faces and houses provoke very strongly different responses. So that's kind of neat. Okay. So this is a model of a cat brain, and this is the visual cortex, which is a part of the brain. And so this is showing a way that we can image things in a little more detail. But once again, you see, they're still only really imaging the blood vessels. And if you know anything about brains, which I guess you do now, because you've done the learner on this and seen some of those other videos, then you would know that, there's a lot more to brains than just blood flow. Like, blood flow tells you almost nothing about brains. It just turns out that when you're using an area, as a consequence of that, you will increase blood flow to that area. This is the idea. And so these are the blood vessels, and these are the things that are going to change. They'll change a little bit in size as they constrict and dilate. Now, there are also different areas of the brain, and these would look just like any other part of the brain if you had a brain sitting in front of you. But some of these areas are involved in different personality traits, or rather, when you have a psychological condition, or maybe a psychiatric condition is a better word for it. There are certain parts of the brains that work more than in people that do not have the condition, and there are certain parts of the brain that work less than those people. So really, it's not like a definite line between, for example, psychopath and regular person. There are various sliding scales and various ways, and everybody's a little bit different, which is kind of interesting as well. So one of these areas is called the amygdala, and that's the AMG. And so this is a slice. If you were looking straight at somebody, this is about halfway along their brain, and that little bit right down there is where the amygdala is. So it's an area that's associated with fear and aggression, and it lights up during decision making. So think of this. Do you know somebody whose decisions seem to be governed by whatever they're afraid of? And do you know somebody who just does not care? Yeah. Probably at least part of what you're looking at, or at least a symptom of what you're looking at, is that the person that seems more fear induced would probably show more activity in the amygdala. And the amygdala of somebody that just, either wasn't paying attention or just did not care would probably be much less active. So let's look at some other fun parts of the brain. So the medial prefrontal cortex, the MPFC, which is right here in the side view, and here in a view we're looking like in the top of your brain. It's located right up at the front, around the middle, and this is the main decision-making site that will activate just before you do something. So this is where decisions seem to come from, or at least this is the last part of the brain that really charges up and activates in the decision-making process. Let's see, posterior cingulate cortex. Activity is going to increase with awareness. So yeah, if you're a coma patient, you're just going to have a little dead spot here in your brain in terms of activity. But yeah, is that the seat of consciousness? It's probably not as simple as that. It's probably not a case where, one chunk of the brain controls one function. Like if you lose neuron 7, you can't smell bacon or see the color green anymore. It's not like that. It's not as cut and dried, and these neurons have connections that go across the entire brain. But there are areas, and there are areas where more of a particular activity will take place. And at the level that we're able to look at this functional MRI level, that's pretty much all that we can see right now, but it's still particularly fascinating. And so the AMG down here, right at the back of the brain, is the angular gyrus, and it's going to be involved in language and memory. So interesting, yeah. If you're having a bad, a bad day listening to one of these, you might need to figure out a way to stimulate the old angular gyrus. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Yeah, but isn't that interesting? And so I think this is also just fascinating. So in this study, they did fMRI, and they're showing different areas of the brain or different sort of views of the brain. And what they were comparing was looking for differences between people who have Alzheimer's and people who are the same age but do not have Alzheimer's or any kind of dementia for that matter. And so, yeah, these are the differences between people. So if it's an area that is active in people that do not have Alzheimer's, it's going to be yellow. If it's an area that's active with Alzheimer's, it's going to be red. And if it's active with both, it's going to be orange. And so what you see are, I hope, little islands. And they'll be either orange or yellow in the middle. So there's like a small area in the center that's going to be turned on in both cases. But like, look over here. You see all the extra red around the edges? Alzheimer's disease appears to be a disease where you just kind of lose control. And so instead of just activating a little part of your brain, that blood flow, you're actually activating neurons outside the area that you want to activate. Still in the same general vicinity, but you're activating far more neurons than you would want to. So in that way, it would be perhaps similar to epilepsy, something like that, where you have one part of the brain just overloading and shutting down the entire system. But in this case, it's just Alzheimer's. And so, yeah, your memory is fuzzy because the location, you're not able to activate those locations in the brain precisely, is one possible explanation. And once again, for anything to do with psychology, you're going to want to go see one of our actual psychology professors. Professor Sikorsky's a great one. Professor Rishodes is a great one. There's a couple others as well. So keep that in mind. Okay, this I absolutely love. So this is from a study where they had people do a little game where they had buttons. And for some of the studies, for some of the tests, they had just one button in front of them. For others, they would have like a left button or a right button. And so imagine these people are going to have a button, one button under the right hand, one button under the left hand. So imagine this is you. The experiment is they get you hooked up in the chair, they get the fMRI going on you, and then they say, okay, let your mind go blank. And then when you're ready, press the button, either button. Don't tell me, don't signal to me, but press the button. And so, and so you would either press, boom, right button, or boom, left button. And the thing is, so let's look at these little graphs. So they were able to detect significant activity in, look at this, the medial frontal cortex and the medial frontopolar cortex. So depending on which one you were going to push, you actually have to light up certain neurons in your brain that control your right arm and your left arm. There is a region that controls each of these, but again, the region, this is really sort of low resolution kind of brain imaging. And they're working on much higher resolution, but it's been tough so far. But here we go. So in the right motor cortex, when somebody was going to press the left button, the right motor cortex lights up, and you can see there is activity, and so the button press is right there at 0, and so there's a little bit of activity. It starts just before the button press, maybe a fraction of a second, perhaps 1 second before. Same sort of deal with the left motor cortex. So the motor cortex lights up just a slight bit before you move your arm. But in this case, of course, we're trying to get back to what's the origin of the decision. Now, there's an area in the center that controls both the left and the right cortexes. And if you can see, it does also light up around the time you're pressing and continues to stay lit after. But there's increased blood flow to the part of that controls either right or left, specifically, about 4 to 8 seconds before you actually press it. Which means that somewhere between 4 and 8 seconds before your brain knew it was going to press that right button, something in your brain, in this sort of middle area, had already decided that you were going to press that button. And isn't that interesting? And then if you go back even a little further, you've got evidence, look at here, -4 to -8. The two sides of the medial frontopolar cortex and the lateral frontopolar cortex predict specifically which side you're going to activate. And they predict that specifically about 8 seconds, maybe even out as far as 9 or 10 seconds before you make the press. So this whole idea of consciousness I find fascinating because I don't really know how to interpret it except for this. And I don't know, if you can come up with a better explanation, let me know, because I really don't like, I really do not like this explanation. But the explanation is that your brain works by itself. And so it's going on some combination of your past memories and experiences and genetics and the way your brain has been built over all the years you've been on this planet. And so the brain works basically automatically. And if that's the case, because if the brain has already decided maybe 8 seconds before you do something exactly what you're going to do, then consciousness is a thing that happens long after the decision is made. Because these people were not conscious of making any decision until right around the time they were pressing the button. They had other tests where they had them sort of blink at the same time they were going to press the button, or blink as soon as they'd made up their mind, and then hit the button as soon thereafter as they could. And so, the other explanation is that consciousness is basically our way of rationalizing this weird machine that is our brain. So the brain decides things for reasons which are utterly impenetrable to someone with a brain like yourself or me. And the purpose of consciousness is just to build a story around that. So your brain does things, and then your mind, you sort of tell yourself, yeah, I did that because, I drank some water because I was thirsty. Your brain just did that. It made all the motions. It decided you were going to pick up that cup. You're just along for the ride. And again, this kind of blows up consciousness and free will, if this is correct. And honestly, I'd be okay with somebody poking a hole in it. The best explanation for this that I've seen, and that sort of led me to this, was one where it's a guy called Robert Sapolsky, and you can watch his entire first year psychology course online for free. He's somewhere out in California, I think. And it is interesting. I have seen it, and it's something else. Anyway, the way he explained it was that, okay, so you've got this, if you say you want to hit a button, you're gonna move your hand or something to hit the button, right? And the hand's not gonna move unless the nerves that are connected to the hand tell it to move. So you gotta have a nerve impulse running down. That's fine. The nerve impulse is gonna come from the spinal cord, and that's gonna come from somewhere in the brain, which is fine. So if we have free will, the question is where and how? Because there are no voluntary ion channels. So neurons only fire when they build up a certain amount of electrical potential, and they only build up electrical potential when the ion channels are a little bit open or a little bit shut, depending which kind of channel they are. And so there's nothing in here. There's no like brain muscle that you could squeeze to change the way a voltage-gated ion channel or a ion-gated ion channel opens or shuts. And so if you don't actually have any control over the one thing that actually causes brain impulses to fire, then yeah, where's the room for free will? Again, yeah, I don't like the explanation, and by all means, come up with a better explanation. Tell me about it, whatever. Leave a nice long post on the discussion board about it. But I think this is worth thinking about. It's interesting. Okay, and so here is also from that particular paper, and so this sort of combines the input from a couple different places. And this is the prediction quality, and so you get about 60% quality. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty good, and it's a lot better than chance. That your brain is making changes which will inevitably lead to a decision up to about 8 or 9 seconds before you actually have made the decision. Now, there are other studies that come on top of this. There are studies where people are told to make a decision and keep it in their mind, and then before they can actually press that, right or left button, if a light flashes, they're supposed to try their best to stop. And so they've measured the amount of sort of reaction time. And it does exist. You can stop an action. You can do something that forces an action to stop if you are mentally prepared to do that. Something like 2 seconds before the action actually happens. The predictive information is all before the button press, and the button press is right there at time 0. So yeah, that's really something. So imagine this next time you're playing, I don't know what people play these days. Yeah, I'm sure it's not Fortnite anymore, but your brain knows what you're going to do before you know, and thank goodness your opponent's brain, is even a little step behind your brain. All right. So that's really something. Um, yeah. So let's read this because I put it in here and I'm trying to remember why I put it in here. Okay, so this is, oh, okay, this is trying to do the same thing with tones. Fine. So there are particular tones, and before you're aware that, so they'll play different tones and then have you do something. But once again, it's a different type of test, but there's this time between negative 2.8 and negative 1.8 seconds where a person would be unaware that they've heard a sound and are going to make the movement. And then, yeah, eventually they will respond and make the movement. But, and people's reaction times did vary from 0.6 to 2.5 seconds. Oh my gosh. But the actual start of the movement happened far before. So again, interesting, very interesting. So how do neurons work? Well, this is actually not too bad. So we can drop out and go to this page. Boop, boop, boop. Copy, and let's go paste it in our browser. There we go. Yeah. So this is a nice little thing that shows you the factors that determine resting potential. So I think there we go. I think there's a way to turn this on. I think this is like a little web game. Oh, here we go. No, it's going, okay. So each one of these animates just a little bit. Yeah, and with all of them together, you can see the entire way. That's right. That's why I put this in here. So this is the entire sequence of how a neuron fires. And it's going to be very similar to what we were talking about with the GPCRs. Remember the GPCRs in olfaction or smell and the GPCRs in vision? And how they would eventually open up an ion channel, and the ion channel would let in one charge or let another charge out. When that happens, here we go. Boop, 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 boop. You can see the little line animating over there. Or you can just play it. There we go. Okay, these are the changes that are going to occur. So those are the changes, and so you can have a look at that. If the original thing that's in the learner is not enough, then this would be good. And I don't know if you remember back to the reproduction lectures, but there were those big sea slugs that I told you about. A lot of this work is done with sea slug neurons because they're big enough that you can get a little tiny probe inserted into the cell to read out the amount of potential on the inside of the membrane and another probe on the outside of the membrane. And so you can actually look for differences in membrane potential, like the amount of charge inside versus outside the cell. So that, I think, is it. Yes, that is all. That is all for a neurobiology lesson. And I think the stuff about consciousness, that is by far my favorite part. Have a look through the stuff about how neurons fire, but I think you're going to cover that enough in the learner that you are going to be more expert on this than I am, and good for you. Yeah, you got MCATs to pass and nursing exams to pass, and so that'll be good. Thank you very much.